There's a photograph somewhere in your house or in a box or buried deep in someone's phone of you at 2 years old. Maybe you're sitting in grass. Maybe someone is holding you. Maybe you're crying or laughing or doing absolutely nothing in particular. And you have no idea what was happening that day. You don't know what you were feeling. You don't know what you had just seen or heard or whether someone you loved had just walked into the room. That moment, that real, lived, breathing moment happened to you. Your lungs were pulling in air, your heart was beating, your eyes were open and recording everything. And it's gone. Not misplaced, not fuzzy at the edges. Gone, as if it happened to a different person entirely. Here's the part that should unsettle you. It did. The child in that photograph is not you in any way you can access. You share their DNA, their fingerprints, their face, but you cannot reach them. You cannot ask them what they were thinking. You cannot remember a single Tuesday from the 3 years they were alive. Scientists call this childhood amnesia, and for over a century they assumed they understood it. They were wrong. The first serious attempt to explain why we remember nothing before age 3 came from Sigmund Freud, which is either a great start or a warning sign, depending on your relationship with the man. In 1905, Freud proposed that childhood amnesia was a form of repression, that the early years of life are so emotionally raw, so full of primal impulses and unconscious drives, that the mature mind actively buries them. We don't forget our childhoods, he argued, we hide them from ourselves. It was a compelling theory. It was also, as far as the evidence goes, almost entirely wrong. But it survived for decades, not because it was correct, but because it felt true. Because it gave people something to find, something to recover. It fed the idea that somewhere underneath the adult you are now, there is a child that knows everything, and that the memories are there, waiting, if only you could dig deep enough. They're not, and the reason is far more interesting than repression. In 1984, psychologist Robin Fivush at Emory University began a series of studies that would quietly dismantle the way researchers thought about memory in early childhood. She wasn't looking for buried trauma. She was asking a simpler question. What did children actually remember, and how do they talk about it? What she found was this. Children under 3 years old experience events. They respond to them, they learn from them, but they cannot narrate them. Narration is the key word here. Memory, as adults experience it, is not a recording, it is a story. When you remember something, you are not playing back footage, you are reconstructing a sequence of events with a beginning, a middle, and an end. You are placing yourself inside the story as a character. You are saying, this happened, and I was there, and this is what it meant. That requires language. It requires a self, a coherent sense of I that persists through time. And it requires something that neuroscientists call autobiographical memory. Before the age of 2.5, none of those systems are online, not fully, not in the way that lets an experience be stored as a retrievable story. So it's not that your early memories were erased, it's that the architecture needed to build them didn't exist yet. And here's where it gets stranger. In 2014, a team of neuroscientists led by Paul Franklin at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto discovered something that made the problem considerably more complicated. They were studying memory formation in mice, specifically why young mice seem to forget things that older mice retained. What they found was neurogenesis. The hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for converting experience into long-term memory, is one of the few regions in the mammalian brain that continues to produce new neurons throughout life. And in the very young, that production is at its absolute peak. New neurons are flooding in constantly, rerouting connections, rewiring circuits. Here's the problem. When a new neuron integrates into an existing memory network, it doesn't slot in neatly beside the old ones, it disrupts them, it overwrites them. The very biological process that is building your brain's capacity to learn, the explosion of neurogenesis in infancy, is simultaneously erasing what has just been learned. Your brain, in its first years of life, was so busy becoming that it had no stable place to store what was happening. Franklin's team called it infantile amnesia at the cellular level. The child in that photograph wasn't just too young to form lasting memories. The child's brain was actively demolishing them as it built itself. Think about that for a second. But there's a second layer to this, and it's the one that most people never reach. In 2018, a research team at the University of Otago in New Zealand, led by Harleen Hain, conducted a cross-cultural study of childhood memory across multiple countries, including the United States, China, South Korea, and several indigenous communities in New Zealand. They found something nobody expected. The age at which people's earliest memories begin, that threshold, the point before which everything goes dark, is not fixed. It varies significantly by culture. Specifically, it varies based on how much a culture encourages children to talk about their own experiences. In cultures where parents habitually ask children to narrate their day, what did you do, how did it feel, what happened next, children developed their earliest retrievable memories roughly 6 months earlier than children from cultures where that conversational style was less common. 6 months earlier. That's not a small number when you're talking about the first 3 years of a human life. That's a substantial portion of an entire developmental window, potentially containing first words, first friendships, first losses, made accessible or inaccessible based on whether someone sat with that child and said, "Tell me about your day." Language didn't just describe the memory, language created the conditions for the memory to survive. Which brings up a question worth sitting with. If memory depends on narration, if an experience only becomes permanent when it can be told as a story, then how many things are you forgetting right now? Not from childhood, from last year, last month, last week? The experience of modern life is staggeringly under-narrated. We move through days that are dense with sensation, with small moments of beauty or discomfort or connection, and we process almost none of them out loud. We don't sit across from someone and say, "Here's what today felt like. Here's the thing that surprised me. Here's the moment I almost missed but caught at the last second." We take photographs instead. We post them, we scroll past them. But a photograph is not a story. A photograph is a moment without context, without self, without the "I was there and this is what it meant" that turns experience into memory. The child in your photograph couldn't narrate their life. That's why you can't reach them. The question is whether the adult in today's photographs is doing any better. There is one more piece of this that deserves attention, because it goes somewhere darker. Not everyone experiences childhood amnesia the same way, and in some cases, the difference is not developmental, it's protective. Research on trauma, beginning with studies by Jennifer Freyd at the University of Oregon in the early 1990s and continued by dozens of researchers since, have documented what she called betrayal trauma theory, the idea that when a harmful experience is caused by someone a child depends on for survival, the memory system doesn't just fail to store the event, it actively suppresses it. Not because of Freudian repression in the theatrical sense, but because remembering in that situation would cost more than forgetting. A child who cannot afford to distrust a caregiver will unconsciously quarantine the memory of what that caregiver did. Freud wasn't entirely wrong, he just had the mechanism backwards. It's not that the memory is buried because it's shameful, it's buried because knowing would cost too much. This means the blank space in your early memory is not the blank space for everyone. For some people, the amnesia is just biology. For others, it is a fortress that the mind built to keep someone safe, and the child inside it is still, in some sense, waiting. The child in that photograph woke up every morning. They got hungry, they got afraid, they learned the names of things. They laughed at something, we'll never know what, and they cried at something else. And on some specific afternoon in a specific room, they felt for the first time in their life something that might have been loneliness or joy or the particular discomfort of wanting something they couldn't name. All of it happened. None of it left a trace you can find. We spend enormous energy as adults trying to know ourselves, reading, reflecting, asking the people who knew us as children what we were like, as if the answer to who we are now might be hiding somewhere in who we were then. But the self that existed before age 3 is not hiding, it's not repressed, it's not waiting to be recovered in therapy or unlocked by hypnosis. That self lived its entire life before the architecture for memory even existed. The photograph is not a window, it's a wall, and the child on the other side of it is gone, not because they died, but because they became you. You just don't remember the journey.